Good afternoon. Welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillow, the Director of Professional Development for the Brown School, Washington University in St. Louis. So glad to have you with us today. I want to thank and acknowledge my colleagues that are joining us to support this event. We have Cynthia Williams, the Brown School's Assistant Dean for Community Partnerships, and also Natalie Galusha. They're going to be in the chat helping to curate questions that you may have. So I appreciate their help with today's program. Want to, for the folks on Zoom, make sure you're aware that you're muted. We can't see or hear you, and we also can't call on raised hands. But this program has a lot of input points that we want from you. This is meant to be a conversation, so the chat feature is enabled, and we really do hope that you will make use of it today. For folks joining on YouTube, we are so happy that you are with us, and we don't have a way to bring you in directly to the conversation. So please play along at home, but we don't have a way to directly respond to questions. Before we get started, I just want to let you know what we have coming up. Something a little different for us actually the next couple days. That's Wednesday, the 21st, Thursday, the 22nd. We're going to be on air through our YouTube channel, 8 a.m. to noon Central, broadcasting the 5th Annual Conference on Child Behavioral Health in Sub-Saharan Africa. So if that topic is of interest to you, you are more than welcome, free of charge, to be a fly on the wall. Really some amazing international speakers, and we're delighted to be supporting their event. And then the next sort of standard Open Classroom event that we have is 1 week from today, when you'll have part 2 of this series. Chris is going to be bringing back a second part of Your Next Move, that on assessment tools and action items. If you haven't signed up for the second part of the talk, and we'll try to remind you of this, we definitely encourage you to do so, as the links will be sent out only to those who are registered. But now it's my great pleasure to introduce Nancy Morrill-Howell, who's the Betty Bowfinger Brown Distinguished Professor of Social Policy at the Brown School. She's also the director of the university's Harvey A. Friedman Center on Aging, which promotes gerontological research and education across disciplines and across the various schools of the university. The Friedman Center is one of our co-sponsors for today's event, making it possible, and super grateful to have Nancy here to kick off our program. Welcome.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Janet and Cynthia. And Natalie and I work together at the Center for Aging at WashU. And we've been developing this workshop over the last 2 years to complement the financial planning services that really the planning of finances that dominates our thinking about retirement. Financial planning is critical, and of course we encourage all of us to do it. But retirement is a lot more than where the money comes from. No matter what our financial situation, we need to have social connection, meaningful engagement, leisure, self-care, etc. We can expect to live into the 8th or 9th decade of our lives, sometimes for 20 years after we leave the workplace. For the last decade, this longevity revolution has been changing our working and our post-working lives. We continue to envision retirement very differently than we did just a few decades ago. And the pandemic has changed our vision even more. And we have tried to bring this new development into the content today. Historically, retirement has been seen as a transition from work to leisure, a stepping down, a stopping. Retirement was about going from work with not much attention to what we were going toward. Simply thinking of retirement as a time of, I'm wondering if Natalie is on the command here to, retirement of going from work with not much attention to what we were going toward. Simply thinking of retirement as a time of stopping work and entering leisure isn't working for many of us anymore. You might be retiring soon, you might be retiring a while from now, or the pandemic may have all of this up in the air. Whatever the timing, there are questions to be asking and resources to be learning about, because we all want to be going somewhere as good as it can be. In fact, with advanced planning, you can all have some tailwind going into this next chapter of your life. We'd like to start with a video of a colleague of ours who shares her story about creating tailwind to move her from work into her post-work life.
My name's Joan Fernandez, and I'm a full-time author. I've written the first draft of my historical fiction book, and I'm deep into revising it. But if you'd had a crystal ball and told me 5 years before my retirement that I'd be doing this now, there's no way I would have believed you. I was really into my job. I was a general partner at a financial services firm, and I loved what I was doing. I loved the people that I work with and the contribution I was making. But then, 3 years ago, I was announcing my retirement after 22 years with that company. I had a tailwind behind me, pushing me into a whole new chapter of my life. I remember the moment when the light bulb went off. I was having lunch with some friends at this little Thai place we used to go to, hide out from work. And we were kidding around about what should be on our tombstone. Like, here I lie, filling my last cavity. Or, I told you I was sick. It gets to be my turn, and I say, here lies Joan. She always said she'd write a book, but she never did. And we all laughed, except for me. Deep in my stomach, it's like somebody kicked me. And I thought, oh gosh, what if I never write a book? It's something I dreamed about since college. So after that lunch, I started looking into it. I went to Barnes & Noble. I picked up a handful of magazines on writing. I subscribed to a literary magazine. I started following writers who did blogs. I even took some vacation days and I went on a writer retreat. After a while, I thought, if I'm going to call myself a writer, I have to write. So I started a blog. I asked my family and my friends for their email addresses and made them subscribe just to give me accountability and some feedback. It was so hard. It was so risky and scary because I realized this really meant a lot to me. And I had this sense of wanting to deliver at this level, but I was just not good yet. But I kept on doing it. Here's something that I did notice though. Even around that fear, I was energized. I found that I was curious and loving to learn about this and having so much fun. But then at work, I realized I had less passion, less than I used to have. And I looked around and I saw all these talented people, and it started to make me think, maybe I should be moving over on the bench and giving them a chance. So my husband at that time was starting to think about retirement, so I did too. But there's such a stigma around that word, retirement, like you're finished. And that didn't describe me. I'm not done with me. So I changed from the blog to finding a book that I wanted to research and write. So when I announced my retirement, I had a tailwind behind me that was pushing me into this next stage. It hasn't all been a bed of roses. It's really hard to change from an identity of being a leader in a large organization to now being a solo writer working from my basement office. But it's moving me into a whole new stage of my life. You know, they say that sometimes the harder the struggle, the greater the prize. That's what I'm counting on. Take the plunge. You have a whole new chapter to explore.
I love that video. And Joan is doing well
historical fiction
with her book and in her post-Edward Jones career. Here's what we are doing today. We're going to talk a little bit about timing and reasons for retiring, and then think about what are you going towards. We'll hear another story from colleagues and some next week as well. Today, I want to introduce you to our presenter, Chris Frey. Chris is a psychotherapist, an author, a teacher. He's in private practice in St. Louis. He's written several books, and he's a nationally recognized speaker on many topics, including life transitions and healthy relationships. Chris does a lot of workshops for professional development at the Brown School, and I'm very pleased that he's leading our workshop today. Chris?
Thank you, Nancy and Natalie, Cynthia, Janet, and welcome to all of you. As we go through the material, I hope you'll keep coming back to Joan's video because she captured in a very vibrant way so many of the aspects of the model that we've developed over time. Our topic, one way that I think about our topic, this new retirement, is aging with energy, and she used that word energized in her video. Today, we'll be offering some new information, talking about some creative ways that you can apply what you already know. Everyone in the audience, not having met most of you, I believe you've been through other transitions, other changes, you know things, you have information, and at every stage of life, that information can be adapted, including the new retirement. Some of this information will include how the pandemic perhaps has impacted our decision-making and choices around retirement. I'll also be talking about your commonalities with others, and the videos I think will help stimulate some of what do we have in common. We each have our unique journey. Also, we have many things in common and can inform each other in making these decisions. We'll introduce one tool today, and there'll be more next week that you can use, very specific tools then to actually move into the action stage of this transition, because it really is a process, not a moment or an event that you can enter into anytime and go back to an update. So we will introduce a tool for you to reflect on, perhaps write, if you're so inclined, write about, and hopefully use as a discussion tool with the significant people in your life who will be impacted and have input into your decisions around retirement. And so, as Nancy mentioned, there are 3 ingredients that we will focus on, the 3 W's, the when, what is the right when for you? What is the right time for you? And also the important people that are around you and have input into your choice making. The why, what reasons fit in your life? What will the motivating factors be in terms of when and why and how you retire? What really will push and pull you in those directions? Then the actual action plan. What will your plan be? We each, I believe, need a vibrant plan that also we're prepared to adapt, because life, as you know, will keep changing and providing us with new input. There is some national data specific to the pandemic that we came upon. This is a workshop that we had done multiple times before the pandemic arrived at our doorsteps. And it was interesting then to see some of how this data might be connected to our model. This is a pretty large national study through Edward Jones. 10% of the folks in the study said they would now retire earlier than they planned. Perhaps there was a change in their job situation that they were pushed toward retirement earlier, or a change in technology. I've certainly had to use, as today evidence, some new technology that some folks just didn't want to adapt to. About 29% of the people in this study said they would retire later, perhaps due to financial concerns. Many folks have talked about needing to maintain some structure in their lives in a time when they were working from home, or perhaps we've been somewhat more isolated, just as a couple of reasons. But really, still the majority of folks, 61% of the people in the study said that the pandemic has not changed when they will choose to move into their retirement phase. To personalize this a little bit more, what we'd like to do is give you a poll and ask you to respond to these 2 questions in the poll, and we'll make some references to see kind of how we connect with the national data and where we're at with our audience today. And as we post some numbers, we'll talk about it for a moment. So in some ways, it looks like we're in the first question, we're not too far off from the national data, although we have a sizable not sure, which is understandable given not only what might be happening with the pandemic, but just where you are at in your stage of life. You may just be, this seminar may be the first time you've really given much thought to this process. Maybe this is an entry point for you. Many of you may be well into the process of deciding how you're going forward into retirement and through it, or have been in the process for a while. So we're not that far off from the national data. The second question is a little bit different though, and I think very, very important. Are you related to how the pandemic has affected you and your lives, you and yours? Are you looking forward? Are you more excited, less excited? And there's some real balance there. The not sure is a little bit smaller. No change is a pretty significant number. As we go through the rest of the information, I hope you'll get more clarity on what specifically is creating this sense of excitement looking forward, or this sense of less excitement, rather than it's worry, whether there's worry or other kinds of changes that you're experiencing that are really affecting how you go forward. With this information, it really takes us into the when part of the 3 W's. When should you retire? When should you enter into this process? Most of the research says that financial factors are not the dominant reason for retirement. In no way saying this makes them less crucial or significant. In fact, it's often in my work with people who are in the preparation stage, it's most often the first issue that comes to the table and is discussed as being of greatest concern. However, it doesn't really often drive the process. It may be that that's because you have been preparing and you've been told that financially you're in a good place to move into retirement. I often hear from folks, though, it takes them a while, even if they've been told by experts, to trust that, to really believe and have confidence in the information that's been given to them, that they're ready. It may be that you are absolutely sure that you're in a good place financially, which could really allow you to put full force into the other factors, the other ingredients that we're going to talk about today, the non-financial aspects of preparing and entering into retirement. Some of you may be absolutely clear that you're not as prepared financially as you need to be or want to be. We hope that you will use the information today to multitask. In other words, as you continue to prepare financially, take time to begin to think about those non-financial aspects of retirement that we're going to be discussing. You can do both and be more ready. No matter what your financial status is, we know you'll have a higher quality of life if you plan for these non-financial aspects of your retirement experience. So your when is very individual, and some things, as you heard Joan say, she felt pushed. You heard that she felt pushed toward retirement with a tailwind. Some of you will be pulled for other reasons, which connects us with the second W, the why. The first question is what I call the desire question. Do I want to retire? Do you have that desire? Are you in that place? Some folks have the desire much before they're able to implement it. And the second is what I like to call the necessity question. Do I need? Is it becoming a necessity? Related to this is a piece of the model called the push-pull factors. Joan spoke of being pushed toward a new adventure and new interests. And these can be both positive or they can be challenges. So you may be in a situation where your work environment is not what it used to be and you feel pushed away from your full-time career. You may have lost some passion for your work. There may be new and different responsibilities related to the pandemic or not that are pushing you towards some kind of new adventure, some kind of new possibility. Many of you will also be pulled away from what has been your historic employment, pulled towards something new and different and original. I spoke briefly of moving from nonfiction writing to fiction writing in the last several years. So I'm pulled toward another kind of writing adventure. Some of you, family member of mine who has taught at the university level for many years is now pulled toward caregiving of one grandchild and one on the way. You may be pulled toward a desire to devote new energy to a hobby, something you've engaged in, but you want to put more into, something you've drifted away from, want to come back to. There may be a health crisis in your family. You may have experienced something in the pandemic that pulls you toward needing to be a caregiver. These push-pull factors can be related to the pandemic, or they can be very specific to your experience and things that are happening in your life and in the lives of the people that you care most about. Which takes us to another video that I hope will tap you into some of those commonalities that we may experience that we can draw upon as we make our plan. Frances is a little bit soft, so I'll ask you to listen real closely as she speaks because she's got some brilliant things to say.
Would have worked possibly a year longer. It wasn't on my mind then to retire, but becoming a caregiver, the situation of my son, the needs that I come across that needed to be looked into, I decided it was time to retire. And I liked what I was doing. I loved my job. Once I talked it over with my boss and some colleagues, I didn't feel any push or pull to leave work. They were very supportive. The pull would have worked possibly a year longer. It wasn't on my mind then to retire, but becoming a caregiver, the situation of my son, the needs that I come across that needed to be looked into, I decided it was time to retire. And I liked what I was doing. I loved my job. Once I talked it over with my boss and some colleagues, I didn't feel any push or pull to leave work. They were very supportive. The thing that pulled me away from work was the caregiving. So continue to have meetings with TIAA, CREF, Saving, and said, okay, if I look at this and then my Social Security, then I can look at retiring. I loved working. I wasn't planning, but this is something that came up. You never know what life is going to deal you. And it could be a family member. It could be you. You just never know.
And so you can hear very specifically from what Frances shared that she did not feel pushed from her work. She was still very fulfilled and committed. She was pulled toward family responsibilities. So for her, the pull factor was very specific. You may have multiple things pushing you, multiple things pulling upon you. She also reminds us, and this is a really, really very vital part of the presentation and the model, that her decisions and many of our decisions about retirement will take place in the context of life, the important relationships, the stage of life, perhaps the pandemic, that those significant others that will have input in very, very, whose own process may be in sync with ours, or they may be somewhat different. So there are negotiations to be had in relationships as we move through our retirement preparation also. One really key piece that I want to highlight a bit more is a pull factor that I believe is very important. I see this a lot in my clinical work when I'm working with folks in my practice on this stage of life. It's what I have come to call a feeling complete. It's a term I borrowed from other kinds of work. Some of you may be pulled toward a new adventure, pushed away from work and pulled toward a new adventure because in essence, you have done what you came to do in your career. You've done well, you've done much, and you're ready to leave it at that and move in a new direction. Perhaps you have fulfilled your mission in the employment realm and you're ready to begin to find a different direction. So you're pushed from that sense of completion and you're pulled toward new possibilities. What will your next adventure be? What will your future commitments be? It's a very positive way to think about this transition and really be energized for the future. So gathering this bit of information, we want to introduce the first tool to you. Hopefully you have this in your packet. If not, you will find it on the website and it can print this off and use it. This is what we call the push-pull worksheet. It's a very specific way for you to begin to answer questions in your process as you prepare. One of the things I also really love about this tool is it's something that you can come back to. So you may do this in the next week even, or the next month. You may come back to it in 6 months and update it in a year, in 2 years, even in 5 years. So it can continue to really speak to you over time. What specific things might push you away from work? What pulls you toward retirement? What stands in the way of looking forward to retirement for you? What are you excited about? And a real key aspect of this worksheet is what will you miss most about your job or your career or your mission? A couple of key components that for many of us is, for some of us, what we do is much beyond a job, even beyond a career. It's a big part of our identity. And there will be grief for some of you, a significant grief. The positives of moving forward and the sadness of what and who we're moving away from. So this will perhaps help you delve not only into the practical aspects of your push and pull options, but also the emotional piece of how you will go forward. And so, what will this look like? What should I be going for? What should I be going toward? And this is our 5-point model, our 5 ingredients. Nancy, when she introduced us, talked about financial security as being that key component for many or all of us, and you have a system to help you with that piece. Our focus is on the 4 other aspects of a successful retirement: purpose, social, leisure, health and wellness, or what I like to call a balanced life. Let's bump to the next one, Natalie. Thank you. So what makes this so important? What makes not only looking at what your unique balance will be, but also why it matters, why this stage of life continues to matter so much. As Nancy said, many of us are living longer with greater health and a higher level of activity. So our hope is that we and you will thrive into this next chapter of life. All of the ingredients, the 5 ingredients that we posted, are essential for any stage of life, and each stage presents both opportunities and challenges and risks for a good quality of life. The risks in older age and retirement are somewhat different. Disconnection from structure and routines or health limitations can change our level of engagement and activity. It can affect our social ties. Many of us are very connected socially within our work environment, and that will change as we move into this later stage of life. We also may suffer, particularly if you're very focused on your work as a big part of who you are, as some loss of meaning and purpose. It's more than a job and a career for many of you. But there are also wonderful opportunities. The opportunity to reshape your schedule and your time and create new balance. Many of us spend time saying, if only I had time, someday when, day when I have the time and opportunity. This planning that you're doing now or can do going forward will really hopefully prepare you for those opportunities. And so you're looking at who you've become, who you've been, and who you're going to become. And in that light, we're going to ask you to enter into the chat, if you will, and just answer this question as you, with a little bit of information, purpose and meaning, your social life, your engagement in relationships, what you call your leisure life, and health and wellness. What is the one that concerns you the most as you look forward into a vibrant retirement? I'm seeing a lot of purpose, a real balance of all possibilities, Nancy.
One thing we didn't see is leisure. We saw everything else but leisure, with purpose being the most frequently cited concern.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so we'll just give it a moment. There we go. And so as you think about the ingredients, and the ones that you feel pretty balanced in, pretty connected to already, one or more that you might have the greatest concerns, we'd like to have you reflect a bit on what that means in terms of the pandemic, because can we show that previous slide one more time real quick? Yeah, there we go. We have come to think about the pandemic as advanced training for retirement. And it came pretty suddenly for a lot of us. In many ways, the pandemic mirrors retirement concerns for a lot of folks. Like, it has changed our routines and the structure in our days. For some of you, it has slowed the pace of your life. I saw people walking their dogs in the neighborhood I've lived in for many years that I never saw outside of their house early in the pandemic. So For others, it has really accelerated the pace of your life as you've had to deal with work responsibilities differently, or you've had children homeschooling at the same time you're doing your work from home. You've perhaps filled your time differently. There have been dramatic changes for many people in social connections and having to be more and more creative in how we've stayed connected and stayed engaged. Changes in your family life, and of course, something that probably everyone in the audience is familiar with because of the kind of work you do, some of the anxiety about the future that has been fostered by the pandemic is a key element, emotional element of retirement, as many of us are looking forward to later life. What will we feel like? How will we function? How will we fill our time? What will our experience be? And so at this point, I like to mention author Neil Gaiman. Some of you may be familiar with English writer. And he says, no matter what the challenge is that presents itself to you, make sure to do good art. Be creative and adapt, which is what we're going to talk a little bit more about with the rest of today's time. Okay, let's break it down a little bit. And we're going to ask you to go into the chat, Nancy. Is that what we're doing here? And again, breaking down these 4 components, what have you learned about purpose and meaning in your life during the pandemic that might assist you as you go forward in long-term planning and move into retirement? Perhaps you've had role changes in your life, a volunteer role, a work role. Maybe you've been thrust into a different caregiver kind of role. What is going to be meaningful and motivate you and drive you forward? So if you can just enter that in. So I saw someone who was put into the role of caregiver. And it's okay if you put in, I don't know. That's something I'm confused about or struggling with. The importance of being around people, social connection, shared purpose, very interesting. More patience. Living off the clock.
Chris, I'm seeing that creative ways to communicate, letter writing to Zoom. We've had to learn new ways to communicate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The importance of being around people because we haven't been able to as much. Mm-hmm. Learn patience. Caring for the community. Mm. Building community.
Family is everything, I see.
Mm-hmm. A couple people talking about new caregiving roles or needing to take care of people. Uh-huh. Here's one we're going to come back to, Chris, the idea of moving. Someone's needed to move and the loss of social connections associated with moving, which is sometimes a retirement decision.
We'll definitely mention that again.
Part-time job, part-time volunteering. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the way I like to refer to purpose is in 2 particular ways. One is what gets you out of bed in the morning to motivate you for the day, a sense of meaning. And then the second is what gives you a sense of having had a meaningful day at the end of the day, that you had a purpose and were moving in a creative way in your life. The pandemic has changed that for some of us. In retirement, we may, some of you will be filling what has been a very large space when you move on from a full-time career. So this is I believe, a very fundamental piece of the process that will give you some more tools to work with. And so let's move to social, the social ingredient. And again, if you will log in on this question, chat on this question, what have you learned about, and some of you already have, about social connections during the pandemic that can now assist you as you go forward in retirement planning? Some of you mentioned just the need to be creative and learn new tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same idea. Be creative and flexible in being with others. Extra effort needed.
I often talk about with clients the difference between solitude and isolation, and the importance that different folks, I do work on introversion and extroversion also, different folks need different levels of engagement and different levels of solitude. None of us benefit from isolation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think people are also getting point that they had to be more purposeful in their social connections. You know, you had to work harder at it and learn new ways to do it and be more mindful about making sure it happened.
Yes, I've heard some folks say that they were not initiators until the pandemic, that they have put more energy toward initiating connection and contact and being the one that reaches out as opposed to waiting to have someone reach out to them. So initiation is crucial, and I see someone mentioning that. Okay, thank you. So let's go to leisure. Although that was not specifically commented on in the chat so far, it is something that comes up all the time in my work with clients and in other presentations. What I like to call the 3 R's: rest, relaxation, and rejuvenation, or I like to call it play. When we were kids and we called it play, we wanted to do it all the time. And we grew up and called it things like working out and living a balanced life. So what have you learned about leisure during the pandemic that could assist you in going forward into retirement, and how you spend your time and really relax and refill your tank? It's okay to take a break.
Mm-hmm. The stress, you required leisure because of the stressfulness of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
People being outdoors more, walking more, no commute, so you have more time for that.
Mm-hmm.
Grateful for interests that they already had, so that they had something that they could use for leisure.
One of the things that I recommend to folks is look for at least one thing you can do for fun and relaxation that is so consuming that other worries can't easily get into your head when you're involved in it. Something that really consumes you. And if you already know what that is, write that down someplace right now. If you don't, spend a little time with it.
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting conversation with several family members over the weekend who are in the world, in their careers are in the biking industry. And during the pandemic, it's been very difficult to buy a new bicycle. Some of you may have found because bike shops were just sold out, and still are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people talking about how they lost travel. Some lost travel, which is, an important leisure to them. Yeah. So that's changed people's plans. Temporarily, we trust.
Very key. So as folks, and I'm hearing as folks are being vaccinated, especially, that travel is coming back and picking up again for a lot of the people that I'm listening to. And from my clients who are dealing with retirement and aging issues, they talk about being able to focus on travel while physically they're still at a real strong place in terms of mobility. So really factoring that into your plan can also be a key aspect, which takes us to the fourth component, health and wellness. And what have you learned about health and wellness during the pandemic that might assist you as you go forward in your long-term plan for this stage of life we're discussing today? That would be physical, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual health, whatever matters to you. If you can enter something into the chat, that would be great. Just walk. I love that one.
Yep. Walking, exercising. So it's nice that something that people classified as leisure is also health producing.
Yes. And in things that you say, I will do this rather than I should do this. I will and I want to rather than I must or I better will probably sustain you.
Spirituality.
Spirituality. In terms of emotional and cognitive health, I also like to talk about staying curious. I have friends in their 70s and 80s who never stop being curious. They learn, they change, they read, they grow, they discuss, they stay curious about life.
Indoor-outdoor activity, faith. It looks like Daryl had a run-in with some ice. Stay off the ice. Smiling.
Yes, I invested in a 3-wheel recumbent bike to replace my 2-wheel bike at this stage of life. So I identify with that. Safety first.
All right.
So as you think about those 4 components in retirement, we hope you will draw on what you've learned pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and what you're going to continue to learn as you do your planning in the non-financial aspects of retirement. So I'm gonna stop there to make sure we have time to talk about, to take some questions and also to talk about resources going forward.
Chris, thank you so much, and to you as well, Nancy. Certainly invite the audience to continue to add to the chat. You all have been so wonderfully involved in the discussion so far. A question that I have is, in a best case scenario, somebody can be very purposeful about all of this and the finance is taken care of, but that's not realistically everyone's situation. So I just like to ask you to expand, if you can, on if somebody, may not actually be able to see the day where financially they can afford to sever from the workforce, how can they apply sort of the spirit of these ideas in a way that's realistic to their situation?
The first thing I would probably say is make sure to come next week, because we're going to talk some more about that and about what a balanced and blended process looks like that might involve a lot of different things, including some continued retirement income and continued employment. What would you say, Nancy?
Janet, what was the guts? It was how to, I'm not sure that I really understood the intent.
So much of what we talked about today really, did not address the finances. Right. But in the event that somebody can't financially sever from the workforce. They need income, just to address that situation and expand as you're able on how not to see it as an all or nothing, or how you might apply some of the spirit of this even if you're not getting to choose what you do. Well, I guess on some level you do choose.
Right. Yeah, when we developed this workshop, in all honesty, it is with HR at WashU. And we were seeing it as, in addition to the financial planning services that we have available to us. So I realize that everybody in this audience doesn't have a financial planning service associated with their workplace as we do. So that's why we were intentionally staying away from that content. You know, TIA CREF was like, that's our job, not yours. And thank heavens, because that's not what any of us do. But for those that don't have the luxury of having a financial planning service, yeah, it's going to, you know, it's something that we can talk about next time. When people step out of full-time work to part-time work, they continue to seek ways of work that have a better fit with their caregiving responsibility, maybe with a health limitation. It's finding a different type of work. And we have some resources for that kind of ongoing looking for work outside of full-time work or your specific job that you're in.
And back to, I mentioned desire and necessity. What I desire to do may not fit my necessity. So some folks will choose to continue to be employed for a long time out of desire, and many of us will continue to be employed at least part of the time out of necessity. Our belief is that, again, that investing energy in these other four components will increase quality of life regardless.
Right. Yeah. I think that was one of Chris's early message. We know that finances is going to be an issue for many people, but ignoring these other things doesn't help either, you know, in having total quality of life.
That makes great sense. So sort of along those same lines, there is an entire very robust industry geared to financially counsel people throughout their lives to prepare for this. Not so many widely known resources or such a widely, you know, accepted process for how to prepare the rest of your transition. So, you know, if you were suggesting a best practice or an ideal case scenario, when would you encourage, or how would you encourage somebody to be addressing these questions, not just when retirement is imminent, but throughout, so that they're nurturing, you know, sort of their whole person for that next step?
Mm-hmm. Makes me think of my nephew, who, when he graduated from college at the age of 22, I asked him what he was going to do next, and he said, prepare for retirement. It is, I believe, very individualized. Many people start very early to desire without any real planning. And so I guess my best response to that, Janet, would be, if you've hit the place where you're thinking about that future in your life, then it's already time to begin to wonder what that might look like and how you would use this model to have a vibrant process, rather than simply being stuck in the want, stuck in the desire, stuck in the idea without beginning to play it.
One other thought that I have is that too often people step out of retirement and kind of, I'm going to leisure, I'm going to rest, I'm going to go on vacation. And when that phase of the, you know, going into the leisure goes away, then people have to start up. They have to start up a volunteer role, start up a part-time. And I think experience and research has showed that if people can start those things before they retire, that makes for an easier transition. And volunteering is a real easy example. People say, oh, when I retire, I'm going to volunteer. We'll figure that out now. So it's not, I have to start. It's easier to continue to do something. So that was sort of part of that idea of creating the tailwind, taking some time to explore before. And the other thing is, Natalie and I were talking with someone, and I can't remember who, it was about people in this era of work are very early wanting to transition to what's next. I think the example was really young people after they've had a real, a career in developing apps or working in Bitcoin, they're done with that. And it's like, now what? So this is like, I'm just separating it from age. At all points, we're looking for what's next. How can I know what I'm going toward?
It's a great point that it's not really about retirement. It can be about retirement, but it's about leading a purposeful and intentional life.
Yeah.
Wherever you are. Nancy, you started to get to this, but I think it's really important, and we are running short on time today. We'll hopefully be back with most of these folks again for another hour next week. But that concept of establishing a tailwind and the challenge that, we all know somebody who's retired and it was like they were jumping off a cliff without a parachute, and it did not go so happy for them after a month, where they hadn't thought about this. So if we're suggesting to people kind of what are those important elements to adapting well, establishing your own tailwind, what might be, if not an exhaustive checklist, just some things to consider that you're building for your tailwind.
Chris? I'm going to let you tell that one. Take that.
All right.
One.
Again, I think if the energy is in you, then it's time to tap into it and begin to consider what matters to you and what energizes you. In some ways, it's kind of thinking a little bit bigger about ourselves. And what is, I like to say that, there's an old saying that I'm a human being, not a human doing. Well, I'm a human being and a human doing. And I want to know where my energy will go as this kind of tailwind catches me. One thing I would mention is, and one of the things I really love about Joan's video is she wasn't limited initially. She didn't get caught up in possibilities or in limitations. She got into possibilities. How could she spend her energy if she was willing? What could she do if she was interested? What might she try out? And for some folks, it will be a matter of testing the waters and finding some different possibilities, kind of like when we were young and tried a few different things before we found something we were passionate about. Mm-hmm. It may not just immediately rise to the surface. You may need to think and write, use these tools, and discuss with people that matter to you. And by the way, sometimes people who know us well will have input that we need to hear that might be outside of our range of awareness too.
So true. So true.
Yeah, and I'll add one brief thing, Janet. I know you have to wrap it up. I think when Chris asked the question, what are you concerned about when you looked at our ingredients? This purpose, the social, the health. What are you concerned about? What are you worried about? That's a good place to start thinking about what you need to be doing to create the possibilities for your next step.
That's great.
We all know that a little bit of anxiety promotes change.
Spoken like a true therapist.
Yeah.
So, Nancy, Chris, we are at time. This has been a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate the participation of the audience. Before we end this program today, Chris, is there any final thought that you'd like to offer everybody?
I would just encourage you to come back next week because we will pick up on some of the additional questions that got started today and provide some additional tools to work with. Would love to see you again. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your time. And Nancy, Cynthia, Natalie, thank you for helping this all roll really well. It's been a pleasure, and hope to see everybody back next week or at another open classroom sometime soon. Please stay healthy and safe out there. See ya. Bye.
Thank you.